now to the third hour, and we're very serious about the hour. So this will be 60 minutes, and that's why we're starting on time, and we honor that at the end. And this is a series of intimate conversations with leaders in our community, sponsored by the United Way. And in a moment I'll introduce our speaker for tonight, but this is an opportunity for people closest to us and involved with the United Way to hear from leaders in our community about topical issues, things they're thinking about in their own businesses. And tonight, and these are designed to be intimate conversations, actually, and we're in really good hands tonight because I know Teresa's going to manage this as a conversation, which is great. So first of all, I do want to thank Ron Payton, member of the United Way Board, who's the CEO over here at Tower. And because he's so kind to host us, I would also give everybody permission at any point, I already covered this with Teresa, to get up and refill your glass or nosh a little further, because hey, Ron's paying for it. And
I thought it was just a venue I was paying for.
And let's enjoy. So in all seriousness, thank you so much, Ron.
You're quite welcome.
Ron himself is an active member of our board, member of the Tocqueville Society, and runs a very vigorous campaign here at Callan & Associates. And I also want to mention that the chair of our board, Susan Sutherland, is here, and our treasurer, Gwen Wong, is here. And as other board members come in, I'll introduce them perhaps if we have a chance. But the people in this room are good friends to the United Way, and we're grateful for all of your time and leadership on many topics. I can't help but say that Connie Moore is a founder of our RETA program, which is a really important project of ours. You know, United Way has set a bold goal, cut poverty in half in the next 10 years by 2020. Well, it's not 10 years anymore, actually. Yeah. We're well into it. And that bold and audacious goal takes the collaboration of so many partners and so many sectors in the community. And it's why we have conversations like this, to bring our partners and stakeholders together around topics of interest, to have you all see one another, the people who are committed to this bold goal, as well as to your own professional lives in our community. And it's just a time of getting to know one another in the community, and we're grateful for you to take the time to be here. Welcome, come on in.
Hi, sorry for being late.
No problem. So I do want to also mention that we do have a really exciting upcoming Tocqueville event for those of you who are members of the Tocqueville Society or considering becoming members of the Tocqueville Society. We're doing a joint event with the Tocqueville Society of the United Way of Silicon Valley down at Tesla Motors showroom in Menlo Park on November 7th, which should be very, very cool. And look for your invitation on that. And we also have we have a continuing lineup of other community leaders following in Teresa's footsteps. And you will get invitations. Actually, Connie Moore is going to be doing, president of BRE Property, is going to be doing one in the course of the next year. To be scheduled, Connie.
Is this news to you?
It isn't. She just kind of
news to me.
She just kind of forgot, but no, you agreed to us a long time ago.
Surely fascinating.
Tony Early, the chairman and CEO of PG&E, Tim Sloan, chief financial officer of Wells Fargo, and Evan Balin, an entrepreneur who will be all coming. So look for these conversations. But tonight we have the opportunity to be with Teresa Briggs. And Teresa is the managing partner for Deloitte's Bay Area practice. And that practice is enormous, with offices in San Francisco and San Jose. Currently includes 2,700 people, serving the Bay Area companies, including consulting and accounting and auditing and tax and financial advisory services. Teresa herself, this is really hard to believe, and you can gasp right now, but she has 30 years of experience. Impossible. Just look at this. Yeah, impossible. That's what I say about myself. In local and national roles, she was a mergers and acquisitions partner, serving one of the largest U.S.-based private equity investors. She spent 6 years as the lead audit partner for a Fortune 50 company, and currently she's responsible for Deloitte's consultative services to several high-profile Bay Area companies, as well as leading the entire Deloitte team in this region. And Deloitte is a precious and valued partner to the United Way here in the Bay Area as well as around the country, and has been for a very, very long time. In fact, the former chairman chaired the United Way of America board not that long ago, actually. Deloitte has supported our United Way in many ways through their employee campaign, but also through their education work and priority, the Deloitte Future Fund on Education. They've supported our Building Out of Our Community Schools initiative, which most of you are familiar with, particularly at Burton High here in San Francisco. Deloitte's been a strong supporter of the Match Bridge program, which Connie's so involved in, and youth employment in the Bay Area. We were very grateful this past spring. Teresa hosted an education summit with the United Way. We brought together San Francisco Unified School District leaders, school board members, corporate partners, all with the focus of how can we work together as a community to strengthen the education system and build that pathway from education to career and lifelong success. And that was enormously helpful. It was a really big moment in our building of the Summer Jobs Plus initiative here in San Francisco with Mayor Lee, which, by the way, did produce 5,000 jobs for young people. And that was one of our early gatherings, and we're grateful so much to you, Teresa, for that. So anyway, I do want to say that Teresa, this idea of mentoring and helping young people and young professionals through their careers to success is a topic that is of great passion for Teresa, and we could think of no one better to talk about beyond mentoring and sponsorship here tonight, and how, in fact, that is a great advantage to all of our organizations. So without further ado, I welcome and invite you to get to know Teresa Briggs.
Introduction, I appreciate it. So I've had a chance to meet a lot of you as you walked in and explained that I had shoulder surgery on Wednesday, and I'm just on the tail end of my Vicodin pain medicine, so I can't be held responsible for what I say tonight. But this is my first day back, and so I can't think of a better way to spend it than with you on this subject that I have a lot of passion about. Let me fill in a couple gaps on my background just so you know where I come from. I spent 20 years in San Francisco in our audit practice and M&A, and then I spent 4 years in New York, commuting to New York every week from Monday to Thursday. Came back in 2006 to Silicon Valley and spent 5 years there, and it was very interesting to see the difference in philanthropy in the Valley versus in the city, which I was more familiar with. And we were involved with the United Way, of course, there as well. Just came back to San Francisco last fall. And the reason I came back to San Francisco, my job expanded to be responsible for the Bay Area in addition to Silicon Valley. I became responsible for San Francisco. And a lot of what was driving that was the change in the way that business is organized in the Bay Area, technology companies in particular, and the movement of technology companies in San Francisco really caused us to step back and decide that we needed to look at the Bay Area as one practice serving industries that really span the Bay Area now. So I'm a big believer in regionalization, so it was great for us to be able to put that into practice and try to organize our practice around the Bay Area as a region instead of a series of cities. And so it's been really fun to be back and see the dynamic nature of San Francisco with the infusion of tech, and I'm really excited about what the city is going to become in its next phase, because it really feels like a sea change for the city, and I'll be fascinated to see how that turns out. Personally, I have a 13-year-old, and it keeps me really busy, and on the work side, in addition to running the practice, I'm the lead partner on Apple. So I get to spend a lot of time in Cupertino on the Apple campus. I was there today, in fact, and you can only imagine the fascinating projects we get to do for them. We're not their auditors. We do a lot of consulting and tax and advisory services there. And so that's been a fun ride. I started working with them in 2005 when it was kind of questionable whether they were going to go out of business. And so what fun to see what they've become. Hopefully we've been a little bit of a part of that. So tonight what I want to talk about is beyond mentoring. So we entitled this purposely Beyond Mentoring because there's a new way of thinking about how to attract and retain and develop and promote our best people, and that has a name, and it's called sponsorship. And so I don't think I need to tell any of you that talent is one of our most critical challenges, I think we all feel that. Many of us are in the knowledge business where we're hiring knowledge workers, and so really our assets are our people. And so how do we make sure that we're providing experiences for them where they want to come and they want to stay? Because we are going to continue to see a talent shortage in the knowledge worker category. I don't know about your businesses, but today we have tons of open positions for experienced people across all of our levels and competencies. And our growth is being constrained right now by the inability to bring on enough people. And so the more we can retain our people, the better off we're going to be, and I think that might resonate with a lot of your businesses. So I'm going to make you guys do some work tonight too, by the way, because I want to have a real dialogue about this topic, because it's much more interesting if we talk about our experiences and share what's happening in our businesses. So let's talk about sponsorship versus mentorship. So when you think of a mentor, throw out, what is it to you? Mentors.
Someone who guides you your career pathway.
Guide your career path, right?
Coach.
Yeah, so they
Advisor.
advise.
Coach, right? Yeah, I think all those things. We all had hopefully had some mentors in our career. So when you break down mentoring, what it typically looks like is, it doesn't necessarily need to be a very senior person mentoring a very young person. It can be only a few years apart. Lots of people can be mentors, so it's not really level specific. You can mentor lots of people, so you can kind of fit that in your mentoring circles, however you organize it, formal, informal, support, feedback, coaching, advice, very typical role of a mentor. When you move over to a sponsor, have you guys heard the term sponsorship? Yeah, some of you have. So when you flip over and start thinking about a sponsor is a very active role. So a sponsor is usually a more senior person in the organization who will sponsor someone who's junior to them. The reason it's important for them to be senior in their role is because one of the roles of the sponsor is to really pull someone into opportunities, expand their own network, pull them into their network, create opportunities, stretch them beyond where they think they're capable of going, have their back, kind of push them, support them. I mean, it's a very, very active role. And so typically with a sponsor, it's hard to sponsor many. So it can't be a one-to-many relationship like with a mentor. It's typically one or two, maybe three people that you might be able to sponsor and really do the right job of sponsoring them. One of the things that the sponsor has to think about is, how do you pick the person, right? How do you pick who you're going to be willing to invest that much energy into? So I want to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. There was a Harvard Business Review study that was done. There were companies that participated. Deloitte participated, Intel, Morgan Stanley, and American Express. And it was specifically aimed at looking at why women weren't taking advantage of sponsors. And so it's kind of fascinating, and I know it's about women, and this is not just a group of women, but for the men in the room, you're likely to be a sponsor, or you're likely to look for a sponsor. You can substitute women for, person of diversity. It's not necessarily just contained to women, but the facts are, women aren't achieving the highest levels in our companies of the economy, who we're really proud of. But if you look at women as a percent of the CEOs in the Fortune 500, it's 3%. I would say we're not quite where we want to be. 1 in 4 C-suite executives is a woman, so 25%. About 16% on corporate boards of the Fortune 500, less so in the Valley by a big margin. So the question is, why are women not achieving the highest levels in the organizations? And this study, one of their conclusions was that women are not taking advantage of sponsorship opportunities, that they're not connecting with male advocates. And like it or not, given those statistics, most sponsors in organizations are men. And so you can kind of say, well, why is that happening? And it's interesting, and it's kind of tricky to talk about this because it gets into sort of male-female relationships is what the study determined. So starting with the fact that women don't necessarily believe that working connections is fair play, that that's sort of a dirty tactic, and have a belief, this is generalizing, but have a belief that hard work will get you where you need to go. So if I put my head down, I do a really great job, someone will notice and good things will happen. and maybe some of you can resonate with that. I can certainly resonate with that. So that's one factor. Another factor is typically sponsorship relationship is a more senior male and a younger female. And there's an awkwardness in that male-female relationship. And so it prevents sometimes that relationship from being established, both because it's uncomfortable for the individuals, but there's a perception about those relationships that it's beyond business. And that can be risky for the two participants in that relationship. And so that's something that you wouldn't maybe necessarily think about when you think about establishing sponsorship relationships, but the study identified that as an obstacle for both men and women, not just for women, but also for senior men to sponsor younger women. They also determined that male sponsors, when they have a female who has children, tend to view that woman as less committed and less ready and able for the C-suite. On the reverse side, when a woman is childless, they're not exactly sure what to do with that kind of a woman. It's an oddity, it's a threat, it's a different sort of, object to deal with. And so women's choices can, whether they pick children, no children, pick your path, seem to create obstacles for them. I thought that was pretty interesting, that information that came out of the study, because if you think about your own organizations and your own experiences, I'd love to engage in a dialogue about whether you've run into that or not in your own experiences. I had a male sponsor. I thought he was a mentor. I called him my mentor for 20 years. He retired about 5 years ago. And he became my mentor when I was very young in my career. He was much more senior than me. And now I understand, looking back on it, he was actually my sponsor. Because he did all those things along the way to expose me to new opportunities, to drag me into meetings, to kind of transfer his credibility to me in places where I didn't really deserve to be, to push me into new roles where I didn't have any experience or background to be successful, and then totally backed me up. And we had a very close personal friendship too. But I did experience some of the things that the study mentioned.
How did you deal with the sort of the perception issues then?
Yeah, I was kind of unaware of them, but I became aware because people would say things to me, like, because we also shared clients, and so we would travel on business, and people would say, you were in Europe with Rich, and with that little innuendo, like, oh, was something else going on? They'd say, well, of course you got that job because you're Rich's favorite, of course, so there was.
I was going to ask you about that. As you're picking someone as the sponsor, how do you avoid that view from others that now you've got a favorite and you're work against that person, and it creates some tension in the organization?
Mm-hmm. You have to be willing to live with a little bit of that, actually, because not everyone is going to have a sponsor, right? You hope that all your best people have a sponsor, but not everyone's going to have a sponsor. So the study found that companies who were most successful in implementing sponsorship in their organization did it in a very safe and transparent way by building it into their culture. That if you can build it into your culture, that with your senior leadership team, that one of their responsibilities is to sponsor others in the organization, and that becomes known in your organization, that's the culture that you're driving, then it creates safety for those relationships, because it becomes more clear that those are sponsorship relationships, not anything other than that.
I'd like to say, before I make a comment, that I did a calculation recently, and half of our management committee of 18 are women, and that happened naturally, not as some sort of preconceived plan. I've mentored young people all my career, mainly because I wanted them to be successful and make me more money. And I remember this young lady who was obviously very bright, and I would take her along to my client meetings, and she of course would do the work, and I'd do the presentations, but occasionally she'd do the presentations, and I tried to help her understand the business and move along, and she was becoming successful, and others were taking her to their clients and letting her do the work and getting experience in FaceTime. And I remember we were sitting in Honolulu one night having dinner after a meeting with the big state plan over there. And she said, you know, the thing that I don't like about Callan is that, you know, there's no mentorship program. And I looked at her, I said, what do you think I've been doing?
Exactly.
And, you know, so I think you're right about the culture, and I think you're right about if everybody's doing it, and I think you're right if, you know, both sexes are getting ahead, it makes it a lot less unusual, or you know, and a lot more usual, that that's a natural thing to do, and it's good for the business. It's really good for the business.
Yeah.
So two things you said really spoke out. One was I realize now that I had a sponsor and didn't know it. I had started as a coordinator out of college at a very low position, became COO, was the COO of a nonprofit for 6 years, very comfortable. He called me into his office, said, I'm not going anywhere, you need to go out and be a CEO, which is then what I did, and did that for the next 12 years. Didn't realize he was sponsoring me, he was pushing me past my comfort level. But the other thing that's interesting is we all hear lawyers, especially our HR attorneys, with a surfeit of caution about these kind of close working relationships, and I'm wondering if you have thoughts about how you navigate through potential HR issues, not just on favoritism, but just the appearance of any improprieties.
Well, I guess you have to start with, there can't be any improprieties.
Of course.
Wow.
Novel, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, and you know, that's, you can't always assure that 100%, but I don't know about your organizations, but there's such a greater level of awareness in our organization today than 10 and 20 and certainly 30 years ago. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was 30 years ago, my first year at Deloitte, the guy who did all the scheduling, he turned 50. And they threw a birthday party for him in the training room in our office. And they had a stripper come to the office and dance topless in our training room at work.
Oh, been there,
Right,
been there,
right?
Not as
So-
a stripper. Just to put that on the table. No, totally.
Right?
That was 35 years ago for me, but
Yeah, I mean, so,
same
I
thing.
mean, that would never
No.
ever happen today. So I use that as a crazy illustration, but I do think that the awareness of male-female relationships is so much more heightened today about I think men sometimes don't even know if they can give you a hug, you know,
Right.
it's gone to that extreme. So you do have to have a culture of, you know, zero tolerance for improprieties, and your leadership team that agrees to take on the roles of sponsors have to be very careful about how they execute that. And you really have to count on the individuals, because I don't think you can institutionalize behavior. And I also don't think you can necessarily institutionalize a sponsorship program. So we talked about that.
But my takeaway from that experience with that young lady was, you've got to define the relationship. You
Yeah.
have to tell them that you are their sponsor, you are their mentor, and why you are taking them along and introducing them and having them do the work.
I think that is a
And that was it.
phenomenal practice.
You got to
Yes.
define the relationship, and that makes it clear.
Yeah.
Because she obviously didn't know.
Yeah, so I'm a sponsor right now for a male partner, one of my younger partners. And so it can also go the other way. And I had an interesting experience with him where I believed that he needed to dress better in order to be viewed as someone who could take on more responsibility. And so I had to really think about how to have that conversation, because if it was another woman, it would have been easier, but for a man to a woman or a woman to a man, it's difficult. So I sat down with him and I said, you know that I'm your sponsor and one of your greatest fans. And I want nothing more than for you to be phenomenally successful, and I think there's something that's getting in your way. And this is a little awkward to talk about, but I'm going to be really honest. I think you need to dress more professionally. And he didn't really know how to take that, looked at me kind of stunned, and started asking me questions. Well, give me some examples. So it was like, no Hawaiian shirts on Friday. And I said, you know, I know that we're in Silicon Valley and it's a very casual culture, but I think that if you're trying to move into a leadership role, you need to dress as a leader. So I would start wearing a sport coat. No, you don't wear a tie. Nobody wears a tie. You look really weird. But throw a sport coat on, throw it in the back of your chair, wear it in and out of the office, you know, wear it in and out of the meeting. On Friday, everyone's casual, but wear nice jeans, a starched shirt, and a blue blazer, and get better shoes. And buy a nice belt. And so you don't have to spend a lot of money, and he has enough money to do this, but you know, I think it will really help you be viewed by others as someone who's ready to be in that role. And it was kind of a stretch role that we were trying to get him into. And so I think as a sponsor, you also have to be willing to be really honest, like brutally honest sometimes with your sponsee, if you want to call it that. And I don't know how you feel, Ron, or other men in the room, but that is an awkward conversation if you were having that with a woman, I would assume.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I would think so. But we had a guy who always had his shoes scuffed up, and you know, and I just said, you need to keep your shoes shiny. And that was 20 years ago, and he's always had shiny shoes.
I think sometimes they just don't realize, to be honest, that
True.
you know, that they're not looking the part or dressing for success or whatever you want to call it. So tell me some of your experiences with the concepts of sponsorship, mentorship. Do you feel like you have a sponsor, had a sponsor, need a sponsor? Yeah.
Need a sponsor.
Well, so I'm curious about your point about institutionalizing or not institutionalizing the program, because that's always been, for me, I'm more of the ad hoc kind of approach to these kinds of things, because it is about that you have to have chemistry with that person, you have to really be able to develop a relationship to either way, whether you're being mentored or you are the mentor. And yet, you know, we've kind of gone through these phases of everybody's got to have a mentorship program or a sponsorship program. How do you think about that as to how, because I think Ron makes a really good point about the clarity of the relationship and of what you're trying to accomplish with someone as their coach. You know, it's really easy if it's somebody that you're your direct report. That's not that hard because that's in the natural day-to-day kind of, you know, coaching. But when it's outside your line and you really are, you want to put a hand out to somebody to give them an opportunity, what's your advice about naming it, claiming it, institutionalizing it?
Yeah, so what we've decided to do, and I think every organization has to make their own decision, is we've decided not to formalize it into a program and push it out through HR and require everyone to do it. Because we've done that in the past with mentoring programs, and it's just not, it had never stuck. Because it is very personal, and it is a personal selection process both ways. You know, mentor, mentee, sponsor, sponsee. And so we started with our leadership team. So we piloted this in the West. So we're organized into regions, so we have a West region. And there are about 30 people on our leadership team in the West. And as a group, we went through the Harvard study. We talked a lot about sponsors, mentors, you know, in a lot of depth. And we, as a team, agreed that we all believe in sponsorship. That it was very important for us as leaders to lead by, you know, kind of building the next generation of leaders behind us. And that had to be an active role that we were going to engage in, that we needed to feel like it was part of our responsibility as leaders to do that. Because if we weren't going to do it, we couldn't expect our partners to do it. And so we wanted to be the first out of the gates. And so it was kind of one of those, you know, all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and decide you're going to do it. And we all agreed as a leadership team we were going to each identify one or two individuals and have it be a proactive reach out. And so we have reported back to each other in the meeting. We haven't like created forms or anything, that we've all done that. So I have two. I have a woman and a man. They're both probably 15 years junior to me, both partners, both very high potential, but also in need of some polling and some door opening and some pushing and some, you know, forming. And I picked people that I like very much and that I think are super competent. Because if you're going to put yourself out for someone and put your own political capital at risk for them, I feel like you need to be very confident that they're gonna deliver. Because as soon as you attach to them and you're pushing for them, then you're also, it's a reflection on you. And so I was really careful in how I picked my people. And I think everyone went through the same thing. They were very careful who they picked because you wanna make sure it's someone who's gonna deliver. And I wanted people who were aligned with me, because one of the responsibilities of the person who gets sponsored is that they kind of deliver your agenda. They're gonna help build your legacy, and they're gonna deliver on your agenda. So I wanted people that were very aligned with my vision and where I wanted to take the organization, and particularly the places where they were playing in the organization. And most people did it the same way, and it was pretty natural. No one said, there's nobody I can think of. There was nobody who said that. Everyone could identify one or two high potential younger leaders that they were willing to sponsor. And so we actually have these little pins, and they say it just takes one. And so we didn't formally pin people because we didn't want that to get around, but we gave them to the leadership team to say, this is symbolic of, it's just one at a time. It just takes one, or in our case, we wanted people to pick two, to develop that relationship. So we chose not to formalize it, and we're really happy with where we're at with the leadership team. Now, we haven't rolled it down to our partners at large, although we've been talking about sponsorship a lot. So instead of talking about mentorship, our frame is flipped to sponsorship. And so we're trying to get people to just start to think in terms of that terminology and what it is. And we're still deciding how we take it now down to the next level for a bigger rollout. But I'm convinced that this is really the key to retaining your best people. That if they feel connected to the organization and loyal and have a personal bond to someone who's watching their back, they're gonna go through a wall for you. And so, the challenge is, can you cover enough of your people with this kind of a sort of a culture change? I don't know what you guys think about that.
Well, I have a question. Do you want to answer first?
Go ahead.
So as someone who just graduated from college, so clearly on the opposite side of the mentor spectrum and not yet at the sponsorship stage, sometimes I feel guilty or like I'm imposing on someone when I'm asking for help. So I'm just wondering what you think of that and what you're sort of expecting out of, because I'm sure you've all been mentors at one point or another, so what you're expecting out of that mentee or out of that sponsee, I guess and what kind of frustrates you.
The greatest compliment you could ever pay anyone is to ask for their help. Very true.
Because we've all been just graduates from college, and so we all had to ask for help. So, there's never a stupid question, so just ask.
But I do think preparation really helps. I mean, in my mentoring and coaching relationships, if it's ongoing, there's work to be done between when we meet, and I sort of expect the person to come back and say, here are the things that I've thought about or focused on or taken action on. Otherwise, you're just spending time kind of, going back and forth. So there's a kind of an engagement in your own progress that I think is really important.
Yeah, I think that, just to build on that, a sponsorship, it's a relationship. It's not kind of a one-off, ask, it's not give and take, and it really is something that I think kind of grows. So, by you asking for help and being a part of a relationship, over time, you're giving back as well because you're growing and developing. So the person who's your sponsor gets back that way as well. So right now you may need a little more help, but over time that relationship really helps both people involved.
And just to underscore what Suzanne, what you just said, the thing that I would find the most frustrating in somebody that I'm mentoring or sponsoring would be if it was a passive relationship where the person is coming to me with, I have a problem, I don't know how to solve it, and essentially is expecting me to do the work to solve it, which is not the way that I'm going to mentor or sponsor someone. I'm not going to do your job for you. I'm happy to help you and to push you to find solutions that maybe you didn't think you were capable of finding those solutions. So I think being an active participant in your own career growth is the key to a very strong mentoring relationship or sponsoring, in my experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. The woman that I'm sponsoring, she was so amazing. She got really organized about how to make this relationship work. So she set up a series of lunches with me, or a glass of wine, either way. And each one of them, she came with a topic she wanted to discuss. And so one was, you know, to understand like my career path and how I made certain decisions and, you know, got into certain roles and just really wanted to absorb and learn that. One was about client relationships and how to take them to another level, and some ideas I could give her on how she could become even better at her, you know, serving her clients. And so she had, literally, it was like, every single one, we have a topic, and we have another one coming up. I don't know what the topic's gonna be, but she decided what she wanted to get out of the relationship with me. One of them was about people that I could introduce her to that would be important in her networking circle. And so we've been working on that. So I do think I agree, taking an active role in what it is that you want help with is important. And then there's definitely a relationship building part. So I try to get out and do something social with the people that I'm sponsoring. I want to meet their families. I'd like to know their spouses, especially what the man I'm sponsoring. I love knowing his wife because I think it takes any pressure out of the situation that might be there just instantly, because then we have a relationship. And so that personal part I think is also important.
So how have the others in the organization, so you have these two, but now you're having, it's like, ooh, I was like, ooh, okay, so now I'm doing personal stuff with these two, but the rest of you, well, you're just workers. I mean, how is that happening, and how are people dealing with that in the organization?
You know, I don't think it's very visible, to be honest. Not that we're trying to hide it at all, but I don't think it's that noticeable, because it's happening, you know, on our own time, or we're at lunch and, you know, people go to lunch. So,
Also all partners too. I mean, even
Yeah.
as a junior partner, you're kind of in a, I'd call it a cohort group.
it
even
is,
though the
it's
different
a
tranches
tiered
are
cohort
different.
group, but yes, it is, yeah, that's right, yeah. Now, I'd say I have some mentoring relationships with some younger, like, managers that I meet with periodically, but I haven't turned into a sponsor yet for them. It's really more coaching advice and that kind of thing. So I think you can be doing both. I don't think you can, it's not an either or thing.
Can I ask you to go back to the personal credibility issue, and I'm gonna ask a question that sort of seems like the underbelly of either organizations or sponsorship or leadership, or all three. I think that at the top of a lot of organizations, perception about who is a good judge of talent is something that tends to permeate. In other words, not everybody's created equal on the being able to identify the up-and-comers. What can you share about attaching your credibility? So you've described, if I pick someone who's not gonna deliver, that's a risk to me as the sponsor. But there's also a risk if someone that is your cohort either isn't credible as a developer of people, or picks people who don't deliver. And what are the ramifications for the organization and for that person to not be a great sponsor? It's kind of a multi-part question,
Yeah.
I think, but sort of gets at how do you organizationally think about that personal juju that you're bringing to the table.
Yeah.
And there's both risk and reward and a high benefit to the organization, but it can also go sideways. I think.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because you're right, it's not in everyone's DNA to be a great mentor, coach, sponsor, or whatever you want to call it. When we started with our leadership team, we felt confident that they were all, because they were in the roles that they were in, and they're all leading groups of people, that they had the right DNA to execute this. You're right, not everyone's gonna be a good judge of people, but I think those situations will just identify themselves and will kind of flame out on their own, right? So if you've got a leader trying to drive someone into an opportunity that other people know aren't competent, that's just gonna get identified. You know, I don't think, unless the person who's sponsoring has so much credibility and they get someone who's underqualified or not qualified in, they might get him in, but if they can't deliver, you know, it will bounce back on them.
So the marketplace in a way takes.
I think it
care
takes
of
care
that.
of it, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is a reflection of the culture of the organization, that they allow a fair play and good success for the overall of the organization, that you can have healthy sponsorship type relationships. Whereas if it's flips to the other side, where true favoritism starts coming in, and people who don't deliver as they are, and they're getting to be promoted and advanced without the true value or worth, then that becomes counterproductive. And I think it all stems down to the culture of the place and what they reinforce and allow.
And how
to have
aligned the
happen.
senior leadership
Yeah.
is on what they
Have you had
value in people.
anyone, not yourself, but any one of your others on the leadership team who have picked someone who has not delivered and they've had to sort of say, I had high hopes for you, but you're not delivering, you're not keeping up your end of the bargain?
Not yet, but that could happen.
With that many people
Yeah.
expect in mind.
We did have multiple leaders wanting to pick the same person, so we had to deal with that. Because, there are some obvious people that you want to sponsor because they're so great. Now, there are also some people who don't necessarily need extra sponsorship. So, when we had multiple, we did identify in our leadership team who we had chosen so that we could deal with multiples. And we did ask some people to, pick somebody else. Because it really wasn't fair to have one person have multiple leaders sponsoring them. I think it's okay though to have multiple sponsors, but in this program, we just didn't feel right about that because there weren't enough of us to go around.
Actually, I have a question. When you were looking at who to sponsor in the leadership team, did you look at the dynamics from a diversity perspective? I mean, if you're talking about growing leaders and creating that next phase, so did you look at, these partners, women and minorities, to say, they look at that dynamic?
Yeah, we actually asked people to skew towards women, just because women are underrepresented in our leadership ranks, and so and based on the study, we felt like maybe we need to actually help our women establish those sponsorship relationships better. So we made that ask, and actually I think if you look at the way it dispersed, it's probably 70% women, 30% men that are being sponsored through this leadership team.
I always have two thoughts, so I'll express them both at the same time. One is working with coaching a woman recently. She's a young woman who's starting her career out, and I realized she lacked a gravitas, even though she's an incredibly talented person, and she has a habit of up talking. And I actually had to have that conversation about, do you know that you up talk? And that diminishes you as a spokesperson for the building, the building you're trying to stop. And then the other
How did she
issue-
react to that?
She reacted surprised that she wasn't aware that she was doing it, and she didn't realize that maybe that was something that was a bad thing to do. And I didn't want to put it into good or bad. I put it into, this is how people will respond. It sounds young. It sounds like you're from the country and not from the city. It sounds like all of that sort of stuff. And so she responded well to it. She's still doing it, but now I have permission to point it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that with the woman I'm sponsoring. She ran a call, and it was a really important topic, and she said about 100,000 times. And it was so noticeable to me, maybe because I was on the phone and I wasn't watching her, that it was more noticeable than if I were in person. And I did call her afterwards and said, great meeting in terms of what we got accomplished, but as a leader, here's something that I would work on, and you might want to record yourself and practice. And she had no idea that she was doing it. So sometimes being able to point those things out is really valuable.
It's difficult to do.
It's very
too.
difficult to do.
And then the second thought was really the issue about if you're working with somebody closely as a sponsor or as a mentor, I have explicitly at times said, I'm going to expect more from you than anybody else because people are going to be looking at us and the work that we're doing together. So if I'm hiring you and you're a friend, or if I'm hiring you and I'm your sponsor, or I'm hiring you and then I'm going to expect more from you than I will anybody else. You're going to be judged more harshly than other people because that's reality.